Trump is a political monster. There is only one narrow window where dialogue with Trump is possible. As is customary in politics, we do not need to shake his hand over Venezuela, Iran, or everything else he is doing today. But Trump is cynically ready to trade Ukraine away in exchange for all of that.
In Moscow, they are openly fantasizing about an alliance with Trump, not for peace, but to finish the job and take Ukraine for good. As 2026 begins, there is no talk of peace at all. Russian propagandists and Putin himself are saying it out loud. Russia has not backed down from its goals. Instead, they keep escalating the threats, waving Oreshnik missiles and warning that any future peace deal could be made even worse. Here is the real question: worse than what? When Moscow's goal is the total destruction of Ukraine as an independent state, what exactly are they threatening us with? New week, new Russian nonsense. I'm Sofia and this is Spin Snipers, where we tear apart Kremlin drama and serve up the brutal facts fast. After the New Year break, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin resurfaced with yet another batch of cynical statements. New Year, same old script. He kicked things off with a bold reminder that apparently all countries have a right to sovereignty. Wow, groundbreaking stuff, especially coming from the man who spent years trying to erase his neighbor's sovereignty with tanks, missiles, and mass destruction.
Dozens of countries around the world suffer from violations of their sovereign rights, from chaos and lawlessness, and lack the strength and resources to stand up for themselves. A reasonable way out of this situation is seen in more insistently demanding that all members of the international community comply with international law, as well as in providing genuine support for the emerging new, more just multipolar world order. An order in which all states would have the right to their own model of development and to determine their own destiny independently, without external interference, while preserving their unique culture and traditions.
It's fascinating how Putin suddenly remembered international law and sovereignty. Maybe it's done watching the US carry out an operation in Venezuela, a country Russia proudly calls an ally. And suddenly, Russia's so-called power did not amount to much. Even the much-hyped air defense systems Moscow supplied to Venezuela, they didn't work at all. Back to sovereignty. Here is the real question: does that principle apply to Ukraine, to Belarus, or to any other country Russia is trying to return into a puppet state? Because if you're looking for a real-life example of how Moscow treats its allies, just look at Armenia.
3 days ago, the Armenian Foreign Minister and Secretary of State Rubio announced and revealed the details of the so-called Trump Corridor Agreement, which is supposed to connect Turkey with Azerbaijan through Armenian territory. Under the deal, 76% of the shares in the company that will profit from the transit, essentially managing everything and in effect transferring Armenia's sovereign rights, will belong to the United States, while only 24% will go to Armenia. In other words, 3/4 go to the United States, and only 1/4 to the country through whose territory it will pass. Meanwhile, our interests were, let's say, barely mentioned.
So which one is it, sovereignty or Russia's interests? Armenia is a sovereign country and has every right to decide its own future. But clearly, that's not something the Kremlin is comfortable with. Here is the irony: the same strong Russia, now threatening its neighbors, failed to help Armenia when Azerbaijan launched military action in Nagorno-Karabakh in 2023. Armenia did not receive real support even through the CSTO, the so-called Russian-led security alliance it belongs to. After that, Yerevan froze its membership. That's what Russian security guarantees are really worth. And it gets better. Kremlin propagandist Vladimir Solovyov went so far with threats of the so-called special military operation against Armenia that Russia's ambassador was summoned to Armenia's foreign ministry and handed a formal protest note. So yes, sovereignty, according to Moscow, only applies when it serves Moscow.
We must make it clear, the games are over. To hell with international rules and the international order. If, for the sake of our national security, it was necessary to launch a special military operation on the territory of Ukraine, then why, based on the same considerations, can we not launch such operations in other parts of our sphere of influence?
Meanwhile, in Russia, they keep openly repeating that their so-called sphere of influence includes former Soviet states. Translation: Russia does not care about sovereignty or the right of countries to be independent. And for those in the West who still believe Russia has no imperial ambitions, hopefully this is the moment their eyes finally open. This is not about security of history, it's about control, correction, and an empire that never accepted its own collapse.
This is just one striking example of how Mr. Trump and the US administration completely disregard the existence of anyone's natural spheres of influence. For us, for example, this includes the near abroad and the former Soviet Union.
All right, back to Ukraine. The Russian dictator is once again playing their greatest hits. NATO expansion, broken Western promises, and every excuse imaginable to justify a war against a peaceful country. There is just one inconvenient fact. Ukraine was never taken into NATO, and if you paid even a minimal attention to US and European foreign policy or to NATO's actual actions, it's clear that Ukraine was kept at arm's length for years. No membership, no security guarantees, no fast track. Yet Putin keeps selling the myth of imminent NATO threats because this war was never about NATO. It was about Ukraine daring to exist outside Moscow's control.
Disregarding this fundamental vital principle has never led and will never lead to anything good. The crisis around Ukraine clearly demonstrated this, becoming a direct consequence of years of ignoring Russia's legitimate interests and of a deliberate policy aimed at creating threats to our security, advancing NATO towards Russian borders. In direct contradiction to the public promises made to us. I want to emphasize this. In direct contradiction to the public promises made to us.
No one ever promised Ukraine NATO membership. In fact, let's be honest, Ukraine was not even invited. Before 2014, the year Russia attacked Ukraine, the country was non-nuclear and officially neutral. No military blocs, no threats to Moscow. Only after Russian aggression did Ukraine amend its constitution and commit to Euro-Atlantic integration. Not to provoke anyone, but because Ukraine believed NATO membership might actually protect it from Russia. Because the Budapest Memorandum, where Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees, including from Russia, failed, despite all the public promises.
Let me remind you that Russia has repeatedly put forward initiatives to build a new, reliable, and fair architecture of European and global security. We proposed options and rational solutions that could satisfy everyone in the US, Europe, Asia, indeed across the world. We believe it would be worth returning to a substantive discussion of these proposals in order to establish the conditions under which a peaceful resolution of the conflict in Ukraine could be achieved. And the sooner, the better.
So what exactly are those so-called initiatives that would satisfy everyone? Because translated from the Kremlin speak, it means Ukraine's capitulation. Russia is not even hiding it anymore. They say it out loudly. They threaten force. And of course, they are not just intimidating Ukraine, they're trying to scare Europe as well. And once again, they reach for the same prop, rattling their Oreshnik missiles, pretending that blackmail is a negotiation strategy.
This is not aimed only at Ukraine.
It is primarily aimed at the United Kingdom and at those forces that act first and foremost as its allies in continental Europe. That is why I believe in one thing. Over all these months and years, Russia has never changed its position. It has always stated its positions openly. There are objectives of the special military operation, and we will achieve them in any case. For us, achieving these objectives is a matter of principle.
Putin also cynically claims the war will continue until Russia achieves its goals. Let's drop the truth. There is only one goal: the total destruction of Ukraine as a state, a world divided into spheres of influences, and one man clinging to power forever. And yet, when it comes to lack of peace, the Russian dictator does not blame himself. He blames Ukraine. Ukraine sitting through freezing winters without electricity or heating. Ukraine, those people are defending their country at a cost of their lives. People who could have been living peacefully with their families if Moscow had not chosen war. But sure, according to the Kremlin, Ukraine is the problem. That's how Russian cynicism works.
It is towards long-term and sustainable peace, reliably ensuring the security of everyone, that our country strives. Not everywhere, including in Kiev and in the capital supporting it, are people ready for this. But we hope that sooner or later, the awareness of this necessity will come. For now, however, it has not, and Russia will continue to consistently pursue the objectives it has set for itself.
Cynically, Kremlin mouthpieces on Russian state TV keep repeating the dictator's talking points, and claiming they are ready to achieve their goals through negotiations. The government further insisting that Russia has never walked away from talks. Listen carefully to this lie, because this is what peace sounds like on Russian television.
Out of humanitarian considerations, we would of course be ready to achieve these objectives through negotiations, and we have never refused such negotiations. On the contrary, we have always proposed them. We have sought to find compromise wording and solutions. However, the goals remain unchanged, ensuring our country's normal security in the conditions of a world that, as our president rightly said, has entered decades of extreme instability.
Although the idea of kidnapping Zelensky may seem effective and entirely bloodless.
And by the way, remember how before the full-scale invasion, Putin was literally begged not to start the war? Macron, Scholz and other leaders flew to Moscow. They were seated at that now infamous, absurdly long table. Putin laid out his ultimatums, and everyone left empty-handed. Putin refused to meet with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, despite repeated invitations, and he's still not ready to negotiate today. Meanwhile, Russian propagandists are dreaming of a different outcome, that they won't need talks at all, because Trump will supposedly hand Ukraine over for them.
Trump is a political monster. There is only one narrow window where dialogue with Trump is possible. As is customary in politics, we do not need to shake his hand over Venezuela, Iran, or everything else he is doing today. But Trump is cynically ready to trade Ukraine away in exchange for all of that.
In exchange for what? Traded for what?
He is ready to do it in order to stop supplying weapons there. He does not want to pay for it. He does not know how he could monetize it. He thinks he can monetize Greenland. He thinks he can monetize Venezuela. But he has no idea how to monetize Ukraine.
Moscow still seems to be living under the illusion that Ukraine will somehow surrender without a fight. Let's state the obvious. Ukraine has Europe's support, no matter how aggressively Putin attacks European leaders rhetorically. Still, Kremlin talking points have drifted back into fantasy territory. Now they are warning about a direct confrontation with the US, once again waving their favorable threat, the Oreshnik missile.
If I understand you correctly, we are not interfering with Donald Trump freeing or saving Greenland from Russian and Chinese submarines. And Donald Trump is not interfering with us saving Ukraine from NATO.
And from Nazism.
And from Nazism.
If that is the case, that would be very good. Because we talked about this. Donald Trump will not be our friend.
But he is capable of turning a hybrid war into a Cold War between us.
So, in such a tough game, do we have enough strength?
I can say that we might have doubted it if it weren't for one launch. The Oreshnik launch. And here, we don't need to lie to ourselves or make any discoveries. Of course, the strike on the Lviv region is an open demonstration that Russia will not allow agreements to be imposed that contradict its national interests.
Russia keeps repeating the same well-known narratives, doing nothing but prolonging the war. It blames everyone around, threatens the world, and tries to shift responsibility for its own aggression. The conclusion is simple and clear. Ukraine will fight, and the Western world must help, not out of abstract solidarity, but to ensure that this war does not reach its own territory. That's it for today. While the Russian propaganda machine keeps running, we'll keep exposing the allies. I'm Sofia, and this was Spin Snipers. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and don't fall for the spin.